Some of you are so innocent and protected that you actually don't believe that you can be manipulated and the messages you see controlled. This can be done in subtle ways or blatantly. I have a life experience that I want to relate to you so you understand what it feels like when you do not ever hear the truth. It is completely different than if what you hear and see are balanced and opposing views, which allows you to make your own decisions. It's a completely different feeling. Well, today in this supposedly free country, I'm feeling this same constriction of information. And it's not even necessary to constrict information to every single citizen. It's about choosing certain targets and having them carry the banner of disseminating the chosen information. This is so tied to the way that things have been done in the past, like the Hitler's propaganda minister, or clearly described as the Ministry of Truth in the book 1984. This is why it is dangerous to limit information flow to one point of view. Usually it means the party limiting the information has propaganda in mind. Let's delve deeper into this and understand how this connects to today's big tech technology. I'm on the platform Odyssey.com and I'm now one of the top creators on there. In case I get the platform, please follow me there using the link in the description. And also join my app Braxmail, which is a privacy-focused social media. My company offers protective tools like a VPN, Braxmail, and now we have officially begun shipping the Brax 2 Privacy Phone, which is a phone that does not reveal your identity. If you're interested in keeping your identity and information private, these products are on my app, Braxmail. The link is in the description. I was born in a different country, and when I was young, the president in this country declared martial law. I remember that well. The army came and shut down all the TV stations and radio stations. All the newspapers were shuttered. The heads of these media organizations were arrested and never heard from again. Then from a complete news blackout, one new TV channel emerged, and it was a government station, so everything that was said came from the dictator. Gradually, some more TV stations were allowed to start up, but a government censor was there to ensure that everything mentioned that was news-related had to come from official sources. No variation was allowed. No one who feared for their safety talked about politics or their opinion about the government. Families internally discussed these quietly, even worried that household help may rat them out. Neighbors could hear what was being said. A society was created where a certain group was rewarded for bowing to the dictator. And the rewards were often financial. So because of this, you did not know if a person you're speaking to was on your side or could report you to the state police or army and have you arrested. Teachers and professors were very careful about what they talked about. Some were not too careful and they disappeared. As I later discovered, many of them escaped to the jungles and evaded arrest. Now, what was interesting was the passiveness of the population, or at least the appearance of passivity. Vocal leaders were placed in government positions that made sure everyone heard that they must toe the line. Years later, the dictator had regular elections, and there was always one candidate, which of course was the dictator. The dictator always won by 90+% of the vote. I guess it looks better than 100%. In this environment, I will tell you that the constant messaging that the dictator was good was enough to influence me as a young kid to actually think he had to be good because no one was complaining. This, folks, is the power of propaganda. If you control all the information and you do not allow dissent, you will actually make the population think a certain way after a while. People just want to live after all, and they will not fight what they cannot fight. Fast forward to a later time when I was already in the US and a revolution occurred in that country. The people just massed to the streets and without even any violence. The people just couldn't take it anymore and wanted the dictator out. The army couldn't kill their own people and then eventually sided with the people. The dictator was ousted. The fact that a revolution occurred showed that what people perceived publicly was not what people felt internally, and it took the guts of many who risked their lives to make a stand for the population to finally realize They were all thinking the same thing. Now, the USA is a different environment, and the world of the past did not have social media. And there are laws that prevent outright control of messaging or propaganda. But the same goals as overt propaganda can be achieved today, sometimes through more subtle and sophisticated means. Just like when I was young, the information flow is well regulated, and not because of anything required by law, but because of behaviors in this new mobile device-focused world. Everyone relies on a smartphone, and many people will actually boast that they don't use a computer. Their primary access to the internet is via a mobile device. Interesting how in the last 5 years that this skew towards mobile use has dramatically shifted towards mobile being the primary source of information. Mobile, of course, is not an open communications platform. It is policed and curated by big tech. Most people get their information from social media, and as you will find, the vast majority of social media traffic reside in a few apps. And the devices themselves are supervised by two primary gatekeepers, Apple and Google. In case you didn't know, it is completely within the power of Apple and Google to block certain apps and certain topics which to them is taboo. They decide that, of course. And these platforms have become so powerful that they even successfully blocked a US president from their platform. My point is that we have corralled ourselves into an environment where most of our information comes from a limited number of sources. And this grants these limited number of sources a lot of power. You might say this cannot be anywhere near like the dictatorship I lived in, and you are right. There is still the appearance of alternate information. However, they will not come via mainstream means, as many of you already expect. Mainstream media. Someone will say, it's okay as long as alternate media can still exist, though with lots of access restrictions. But that misses the point, as you will find later. Hitting a particular demographic becomes impossible if you can't reach the demographic you want to target. The only ones who will go to alternate media sites are those already convinced, and so those sites tend to be echo chambers filled with people having the same belief. So let's talk about the alternate approach in a democratic society. Since you cannot legally shut everyone up, then the powers to be have an objective. And the objective, of course, is power, control, and I'm sure money is tied in there too. And unlike the dictator days of my youth where an army was there to enforce the rule, nowadays the approach is more Madison Avenue style, marketing and advertising. This is something that many in that industry already understand. You can have a more profound effect on your target market if you focus your message to a specific target market. In the months leading to the 2016 election, an organization called Cambridge Analytica captured information about 50 million Americans from Facebook. Data scientists studied the social media data from Facebook and arrived at a personality profile of each person in its database based on how they interacted on Facebook. I'm sure they also knew the political affiliations of each one, but they categorized people based on personality features like being extroverted, introverted, openness, and other characteristics. This, of course, was an early experimentation, but the idea was to classify people in some way, and then doing focus groups, they tested various messages against this focus group to see how the group reacted. So it's like a scientific method. They then used this information to create a marketing plan, so to speak, of how to do effective messaging to the population to convince them of a viewpoint. In other words, they were already seeing if they can manipulate a population's opinion. They didn't have to reach every single person, just the right kind of person that could swing their vote. You see, that's the mistake in understanding here. In order to achieve control, the goal has to be to target people that can be changed, people that are more gullible. So those with very strong viewpoints often feel they are not a target. Well, maybe they're not, at least for convincing them of a different point of view. But the promoters and detractors can be manipulated too by getting them riled up and getting them angry. And that serves a purpose too, like making one side a louder and more dominant voice. The point is that not all of us need to be a target or need to be the same kind of target, but all of us are affected in the end, and the ones that may be changing our lives and our choices are those with nothing to hide. They are the ones most easily profiled. They are the ones that are easily convinced of what the mainstream view is, and they are the ones who could change their vote and make something considered extreme as an idea in the past sound mainstream today. And believe me, I'm old enough to see that what is considered mainstream today was nowhere near what was mainstream many years ago. We get battered enough with a limited set of viewpoints that we actually accept our current situation is mainstream. Back in the old days, the idea of a government ID was always labeled as Big Brother, and the majority resisted it. I remember seeing debates on this topic in a big way, and this was before smartphones. Today, the arguments against a government ID have been minimized except for some organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation or someone like me. We're definitely not considered mainstream. Now, we already have a real ID, enhanced ID with RFID, and then combined with the actual verifiable ID that is our mobile phone. And like happy sheep, we just accept this. Our phones track our locations 24/7, our clicks recorded, our emails and texts forwarded to a government database, and today this is accepted as a necessity for our safety. This is an example of how opinions can be thwarted by constant repetition with no dissenting voice. Now, the moves to convince a population can be subtle. In the old days, the Voice of America radio station would broadcast in shortwave frequencies in order to reach people in countries with repressive governments. Now, this is done in social media. Ideas that big tech want to promote are amplified. This is a very important word. Amplification. For example, who gets heard on YouTube is based on what content is allowed by the YouTube algorithm. Channels like mine are likely allowed to play in the playground as long as we don't get to be too big in the playground. You got to be a little kid. Things like trending and recommendations are subtle ways to show you that someone decides what you should see. Maybe you're naive and you think that your popularity on YouTube is based on the fact that you're such a genius creator. The fact of the matter is that YouTube chooses who becomes successful. Yes, YouTube will share my videos with all my subscribers, eventually. But they may not share you outside the subscriber base, and I can, for example, see that in an analytic called impressions. Impressions, in my case, rarely go past the number of subscribers. Meaning, to be frank, I acknowledge that I'm under their control entirely. At times, I am not even recommended to my own subscriber base. The point is that the messaging can be controlled. I have several important videos that talk about some of the specifics that I'm generalizing here, like how a Google actually tracks everyone's beliefs and how this is used to alter search results. And there are belief maps that could actually identify specific people in a location that hold certain points of view. This is actually more specific than even an election map because it includes people who didn't vote. Now think about how valuable it is to know what certain people think and in which neighborhoods. You don't think that could be useful for doing focused messaging? And if messaging isn't the objective for these individuals, the other thing that can be done is suppression. These extremely important topics were in 2 videos. I repeated one, and a year later, the results were the same. Suppression. Other more general videos do better. Here's another technique for controlling the volume of a message. Shadow banning is when social media platforms like Twitter allows you to post whatever you want, but you will notice that your followers don't see your posts. I've verified that this occurs on Twitter. I've verified it on accounts with left or right-leaning views. They do this all the time. This is the more subtle way of shutting an opposing viewpoint down. Make you disappear, make you insignificant. I have to be careful about what I say because I can be made to disappear on this platform and other platforms. But the point is clear. If you say too much and it interferes with the agenda, whatever that is, then you are emasculated in the internet. The problem, though, is that the average person doesn't realize the vulnerability, and the vulnerability to manipulation actually extends beyond ourselves, but to the people around us. If our friends and relatives are oblivious to the fact that they're not making free choices but selecting from a limited set of choices, then our freedoms are severely affected. Just like when I was young, elections were held and there was only one candidate or candidates in lower positions that were hand chosen by the dictator. So applied to our current times, our family members get their information primarily from their phone apps, with the big tech social media platforms often giving limited points of views on both sides. Certain topics are hotly debated today. So that seems like a free society, right? Open debate. Yet what you actually don't notice are the topics that don't appear to be debated. Why is that? Could a left or right-wing debate on a topic just be a distraction? The distraction is what topic is being discussed versus what topic is not being discussed. This again is part of the amplification of the message. Naive people think all of these are just random. But when you have power to control, one must always assume that power is being used. Certain topics are very bad for big tech and their money-making ability. Example topic, privacy, that phones are bad, that they work with government in a private-public partnership to spy on us. Like I said, certain topics have been pushed to the side without debate. Another example, the Patriot Act, the right of government to investigate anything, overriding or suspending the Fourth Amendment with the need for a warrant. Sure, they put in a FISA court to substitute for the warrant supposedly. But the fact of the matter is that 100% of the warrants are given, rubber stamp, because it's there for appearance only. Rules that have been added quietly include Rule 41 that was implemented by the Justice Department, which authorizes the FBI to hack anyone if they're using encryption. This is tantamount to saying every car will be stopped and the trunk of your car opened without a warrant and without cause, the cause here just being that the trunk was locked. What I'm talking about here is subtle. Whoever can control the conversation can control ideas. One of the more drastic ways that the conversation is controlled is by outright banning of dissenting voices or censorship. It's funny how this happened and how big tech got away with it. Twitter, Washington Post, New York Times, and others all decided to suppress certain topics like the Hunter Biden laptop. Now that it can't have any impact on an election, they can say, oh well, we made a mistake. Yeah, right, like this wasn't planned out. In a free society, what is there to fear with all the facts being laid out for all to see? Why are people not allowed to decide for themselves? Oh, people are like innocent babes. They're too immature to decide content for themselves. I can name so many topics that were suppressed, and I don't know what the fear is. If the idea is fake news, then a constant debate will drum that into all of us. But they don't want a debate to occur because that would amplify the topic, and that's part of the control process. Decide which conversations can occur. Decide which conversations to bury. In the book 1984, the job of the Ministry of Truth was to keep replacing even recorded history, so that as time goes by, it was hard to even remember what happened in the past because you could no longer find it. So in that 1984 book, Big Brother had the Ministry of Truth change the enemy. The old enemy was now an ally, and there's a new enemy. That is an absolute power that can be applied in states with a repressive government. But it doesn't have to be that obvious in a supposed free society like the US. It starts with just convincing enough people what the mainstream idea is. Then start the labeling process. Certain people will be flagged as fearmongers, tinfoil hats, conspiracy theorists, and turn them into negative labels so those people have a suppressed presence. And if they get too powerful, then the more drastic measures like outright banning can be put into effect. Now all this is possible today because we rely on a single source of information, at least the majority do, and that is the smartphone. If the smartphone were controlled by 1,000 different enterprises, then it would be a different thing. But today, it is controlled only by two players, Apple and Google, two of the largest corporations in the world, more powerful than most countries. This video is more about presenting a problem, and a solution really isn't the focus, but I talk about that in other videos. The phone is not just a source of information. The phone profiles you and your beliefs, so that is how it is given the power to give you alternate information, just like an advertiser finds you based on what you have recently thought about, searched, or done. The general solution is to block big tech from finding out what you think or classifying you based on what you think into some cohort that can be the subject of controlled messaging. The only way to implement this is to rethink your choice of a phone, but that's something you can pick up in my other videos. At the time I made this video, Elon Musk just made an offer to buy Twitter outright, which will turn it private. I don't know how this will go, but in theory it can turn the big tech story upside down. I'm sure I'll be talking about this later. See you next time.